today on Beyond 6 Seconds.
People are talking about your messes. Your boss, the receptionist, the members of your team, your spouse, they know your messes. So why not just be authentic, be vulnerable, admit them, and create a culture where it's safe for others to not wallow in or languish in, but admit their messes and not have them used against them or live in fear of them, but really be aware and move towards success.
Welcome to Beyond 6 Seconds, the podcast that goes beyond the 6-second first impression to share the extraordinary stories and achievements of everyday people. I'm your host, Carolyn Keel. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Stott Miller. Entering his 23rd year at Franklin Covey, Stott serves as the EVP of Thought Leadership and is the author of the #1 hot new release on Amazon, Management Mess to Leadership Success, 30 Challenges to Become the Leader You Would Follow. In addition, Stott hosts 2 podcasts, one for iHeartRadio called Great Life, Great Career, and the other, which is part of the world's largest growing newsletter devoted to leadership development, On Leadership. Stott, welcome to the podcast.
Carolyn, my pleasure. Thanks for hosting me.
I'm so excited to learn all about your leadership journey and learn about your new book. So I'm intrigued by the title, and maybe we can start out by talking about what is a management mess and why did you call yourself that?
Well, the best definition is probably my career. So I have been privileged to have worked with the Franklin Covey company, where I'm still, last time I checked, gainfully employed. Of course, the firm that was co-founded by Dr. Stephen R. Covey, author, of course, of the book that sold 30 million copies. Can you believe it? The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Awesome.
And I've been in the firm for 23 years. And it's my pejorative that we're one of the, if not the most reputable leadership development firm in the world. And as I have ascended up into the executive team after my career here, I've had 9 jobs in 23 years in the same company. I started to think, the world needs one more leadership book. A little less aspirational, a little less tidy, a little less everything always works out. And that's not my career, right? My career has, unlike some, always been sort of 1 step forward, 2 steps back. So I decided to write a book that was really about giving permission to be vulnerable, admit the fact that we all have messes. Nobody's a complete leadership success, Carolyn, and no one's a complete management mess. And the fact of the matter is, people are talking about your messes. Your boss, the receptionist, the members of your team, your spouse, they know your messes. So why not just be authentic, be vulnerable, admit them, and create a culture where it's safe for others to not wallow in or languish in, but admit their messes and not have them used against them or live in fear of them, but really be aware and move towards success.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like telling those honest leadership stories are probably some of the best ways to learn, because leadership, we tend to put a lot of expectations on our leaders, but leadership is really hard. There's not just one correct way to do it, and as long as you follow this one path, you'll be fine. It's difficult, and a lot of people kind of get thrown into it in their careers. So I think a lot of people will really appreciate this book. So,
I appreciate that. It's actually debuted, and now it's in its 3rd week as the #1 best-selling new release on Amazon. It sold close to 8,000 copies in the last 10 days. So I do think we've hit a chord. I think, to your point, it was actually quite easy for me to admit my messes. That's one of my brands. My wife's convinced I'll never work again, Carolyn. So the writing thing needs to work out for me.
Oh, that's really extraordinary. And I think a lot of people are nervous to admit their messes and their screw-ups as leaders. But clearly we can learn a lot from that, because if we do take that point of leadership, we will definitely have those failures and those messes, particularly when we're first starting out. I'm curious, when most of us first become leaders, we don't typically get formal leadership training. We don't all get to go to the wonderful Franklin Covey courses that you offer. So a lot of us are left to kind of figure out what we think successful leadership should look like or behave like. What experiences shaped your early ideas of what a good leader should be, and how did you model your early days after that?
Well, you're exactly right on your point about accessibility to courses. The research shows that the average person is promoted into their first leadership management role when they're 30, but don't receive their first leadership management training, Carolyn, until they're 42.
Yeah.
There's a 12-year kind of wandering in the wilderness where we're doing damage to people. So I do think it's important for leaders, as you're thinking about promoting people into leadership, not to lure them in, but to lead them in. Make sure people understand that leading people is tough. It's unrewarding. It's relentless. It's sometimes lonely and humiliating. And it's, you're prone to a lot of mistakes. I think too often people are individual producers that are really the best salesperson, the highest rated graphic designer. They're the most efficient dental hygienist. Mm-hmm. And then they become promoted like I did into a leadership role. And they realize this is a completely different demand on a skill set that I don't have. And that was one of my biggest challenges. I was typically a star performer on projects, on my revenue goal, and I wasn't equipped to understand the types of talents that were needed. My charismatic personality, Carolyn, only took me so far, right? My ability to roll my sleeves and work hard took me so far. Those are not traits that are always great to have as a leader. They're not bad traits. They're just, you have a different mindset on how to lead people. So for me, one of the biggest things I struggled with as I became a leader was realizing the role of relationships. And that leadership really is that, right? It's about recruiting and retaining talent, about making it safe for people to share their concerns, share their fears, share their dreams, and really build high trust relationships. I kind of thought it was about being productive, squeezing the most out of people, raising them to a new standard. And it's also about, raising people. But one of the things that Dr. Covey taught me, Carolyn, which was always counterintuitive, is that with people, fast is slow and slow is fast. I always have this sort of inherent need to go faster, be more productive, make a list and check things off. I'm the kind of person that on a Saturday morning, I'm beating the employees to Home Depot to buy my flowers, right? I'm ready to plant them, get them done, check them off and move on. And that's great when it comes to planting marigolds on a summer.
Right.
But it's not great when you're trying to develop mutually trusting, calm, beneficial relationships. So that doesn't mean that I undervalue my friendships by any stretch. I just tend to be an efficiency-minded person. And I think leaders need to be more effectiveness-minded, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And those relationships are so important. I always, growing up used to read that, you can't bring your emotions to work and you're just there to do a job. But realistically, people are still people and you can't work them like machines. And it sounds so obvious, but so many leaders, particularly when they're starting out and they're coming in without any kind of training, they kind of miss that. They're like, oh, I'm in charge now and I have the power and I can do what I want. And it pretty much never works that way. So that's important learning.
Yeah. Can I expand on that for a moment?
Please.
Yeah, I think your comments are so wise because, as a leader, I think it's a bit counterintuitive what works. Relationships are everything in the office as well. Mm-hmm. And appropriately, people want to be loved. Everyone's got something going on. Everyone's marriage is not as good as it looks. Everyone's under some financial pressure. People owe bills. They've got bill collectors calling them. They got their college loans. There's someone sick in their family. I think great leadership, and Carolyn, I've learned this the hard way, is about slowing down and caring for your people, how they need to be cared about. Some people don't want to discuss their finances, right? And don't want to be hugged, right? We know the boundaries. But I do think that with all of the Me Too movement and the necessity for leaders to be more cautious and more deliberate, I want to make sure we don't lose the humanity in work, because the fact of the matter is, we spend, for most of us, more time with our business colleagues than we do awake with our family and friends. Mm-hmm. And if you spend that much time with your people, you want to feel respected, liked, valued, loved, cared for, understood. And so I would just remind leaders, in the midst of all the appropriate awareness raising around what the workplace should be like, let's also not lose our humanity for some of my best friends are people I work with. Doesn't mean I'm hugging them or touching them inappropriately or saying things that aren't respectful to them, but I do love many of them and I hope they love me. And these are lifelong friendships that will transpire long after we go our separate ways professionally.
Strong leaders really do build those bonds among their teams because we do spend so much time together with our teams and our coworkers at work. It helps get things done. And it's just, it's just nice to be able to, really have a relationship and feel like your coworkers are looking out for you and your leader has your best interests in mind. That doesn't mean that everything always works out in the best way and that everybody's always happy, but you want people to have their hearts in the right place. Yeah,
it doesn't. Something else you mentioned, Carolyn, that I write about in the book is this idea that when we're promoted into leadership, I think we think we're supposed to have all the answers and make all the decisions and be the expert. And of course, it's just simply not true.
Yeah.
And does it need to be true? I would challenge your listeners, for those who are in leadership roles, to really recognize your job is not to have all the answers and be the smartest person in the room. I think your main job, even above strategy, vision, creating systems, setting vision, managing budgets, all that, is to attract and retain smarter people than you. We're often thought that we have to be the genius at work. And to quote my friend Liz Wiseman, who wrote, I think, one of the best leadership books ever authored, Multipliers, we move from being the genius in the room to the genius maker. We create a culture where it is safe for other people to feel smart, to take risks, to share ideas that maybe are half-baked, and to say what's kind of on their mind and recognize their idea might not be all the way baked, but to have an environment where it's so trusted, where you might have the first part of a good idea, kind of like a Mad Lib, and you having the culture where it's safe to share a half-baked idea could allow somebody else to share the other half of it you haven't thought through yet. I mean, that's a place where people would choose to stay and say no to the recruiter's inquiry on LinkedIn tomorrow to move somewhere else for $10,000 more or $5 more an hour.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. As a leader, it takes showing vulnerability, which is, not something that we always think of when we think of leadership models. Although with the popularity of servant leadership and those types of models coming out now, it's a little bit more common. But, it's tough. There is a pressure when you step into leadership to feel like you need to know all the answers and that you have to tell people what to do. But then you miss out on all the great ideas and inputs of your teams if you do that.
Says easy, does hard, but you nailed it.
Yeah. So tell me about some of your early leadership stories. And in the first part of your book, you actually tell a pretty significant management mess story from one of your first roles in leadership. Would you mind telling our listeners about that?
Yeah, I don't mind. I wrote 30 of them to be exact. So, this book wasn't meant to be a confessional necessarily or a tell-all book by any means. I did write it to give voice to those people who struggle with being a leader like I have. Mm-hmm. And I really believe, to your point earlier, vulnerability is a key leadership competency. That's not a nice to say. I think Brené Brown's done a tremendous service to the world on all of her writings. And I've always found that my own vulnerability generally serves me well. Not always, but generally. So I wrote this book. It's very easy to read, 30 challenges that every leader faces. And I wrote a story around most of them around I was just a mess. That I know, not unethical or immoral, illegal, mm-hmm. but that's kind of saying and doing the wrong thing because I was being too fearless or taking too much risks or saying things that weren't, well thought through and being too impetuous. So I share a lot of the stories. One that you mentioned is one of my first leadership roles. I had a 2-day professional development meeting, well-intended to educate the sales team that I was leading on all the new features and benefits and qualities of one of our own offerings. Now, how can you sell it to a client if you've not gone through the same experience? So they showed up late the first morning. I was quite incensed and was really irritated they would respect my new authority, right, as the leader. And I would be so disrespected that they would show up late. So the story that I share, which by no means is the most shocking in the book, is on day 2, I show up on the next morning with about 15 copies of the Salt Lake Tribune. And I literally slam them down on everybody's table and say, if you want a job from 9 to 5, Dillard's is hiring.
Wow.
And I thought it was my finest leadership moment. I will be respected. I will command your punctuality. And how absurd, right? And wow. The most absurd part, Carolyn, wasn't the deed. It was my deeply entrenched paradigm that I thought I was right. And it took several days and weeks for the consultant that was teaching the program, my friend Nancy Moore, to help me come to understand why I had not shown great leadership skills. I had a right to be upset, come to the meeting on time. Mm-hmm. And I'd done my work on getting the budget allocated and winning the boss's approval and organizing the conference room and hiring the consultant and ordering the food and having the materials there. The least they could do is show up. You know what? I probably could have just had a gracious conversation to say, hey guys, ladies, can I ask you a favor? In the future, can we live our own content and be more punctual? It disrespects, forget me, but it disrespects Nancy. There's so many ways that I could have inspired people as opposed to shaming them and humiliating them. Felt good in the moment, but things that usually do never end up well long-term. So there's 30 stories like that, all built around demonstrating humility, thinking abundantly, inspiring trust, leading difficult conversations, righting wrongs throughout the chapters. I think they're all somewhat horrifying. There's a couple that I share that I'm actually quite good at. But kind of like all things, sometimes our strengths overplayed can become weaknesses. So what might have been a leadership success to me, I tend to, if something will run well at 12, I'll turn it to 14, right? Every dial in my car as a teenager was always broken because I turned it too hard, right? And likewise, in leadership, sometimes your strengths can become weaknesses when overplayed. I'm a living testament to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like you have many stories that you're very transparent in sharing about, that you were calling yourself a management mess, and that you really learned from them. And that's really the key, right? Is that, really all of us should be striving to learn from our failures and our successes and be reflective on them. But sometimes that's easier said than done. And, we don't always learn from our failures and difficulties. So how did you build and have the mindset to really reflect on what happened and then grow from the challenges and the failures that you had?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I think I've been uniquely privileged to work in a company, the Franklin Covey company, that operates a little bit on a pre-forgiveness culture, that we really want to grow and mentor and change people for the better, that we do give people second chances, and I'm the king of second chances. I also think that I have, for what might have been some big immaturities in life, I've always had a mature side, which was a small side, but it was about this concept I call friending up. And that is, I've always been just smart enough to be friends with people who are smarter, wiser, older, better traveled, more experienced, more accomplished. So I've always friended leaders who were older than me, like 10, 15 years older, because I always thought I could benefit from being around people who were just older and wiser than me. And so I'm really the product of a series of great leaders who were patient, who really cared about me, who had the courage to sit down and say, Scott, you cannot say that. Scott, that's idiotic. You cannot do that again. And so I think I also created a culture, if you will, that with myself, where people could move outside their comfort zone and tell me when I was right and when I was wrong. And I wasn't belligerent about it. I would, it may take me a couple of minutes or hours or days to get there, but I was really open. I am very open to people giving me feedback. Doesn't mean that all the feedback's always helpful or always right or always even about me. I have a whole chapter on feedback and making it safe to tell the truth. And so I think my biggest growth has come from identifying, earning the trust, losing the trust, and re-earning the trust of people who really cared about me and re-extended to me opportunities that I hopefully rose and maintained their trust over the course of time with. And I think it's instructive to know that I am the beneficiary of earning the trust of people. And when I broke it, which of course we do sometimes, I worked hard to re-earn the trust of people who had my best interest in mind and who probably saw a greater Scott than even I saw in myself.
Absolutely. And actually, the end of that first story that you told about the meeting that you had, really builds on that trust, because you say that 10 years or so later, you're friends with all those people who you were in the meeting with, that you slammed down the newspaper and had your management mess moment. And for me, I think it's the most amazing part of that story is that you were able to break that trust and truly learn and then gain all that trust back from those people who became your friends and your supporters.
Yeah. Carolyn, it's a small world, right? And I don't burn bridges. If someone chooses to burn their bridge with me, that's their choice. I'll typically take their call. I have lots. It's amazing how many times someone has taken me down on Glassdoor, right? Or, called someone to complain about me. And you know what? Life is short. Your reputation is your most valuable asset beyond your soul if you're religious. So I've really always tried to say, I'm sorry. I don't always get it right. I have a whole chapter around excuse-free apologies and how to right wrongs. I hope that my legacy will be that I'm not arrogant. I'm not so arrogant, because of course I'm arrogant. We all are. I'm not so arrogant that I'm not willing to step to the plate and admit maybe even a moment of extreme vulnerability. I don't get really uncomfortable, and people don't tend to scare me, but I am very much willing to laugh at my mistakes, not fluff them off, because I know I'm an officer in a public company. I have a fiduciary responsibility to behave and tell the truth and follow the law and respect people. And so I'm very mindful of my role. And I'm also mindful that we're kind of all in the game together. Everyone's trying to build and win and succeed and grow, and a little more tolerance, a little more respect, and just a little more forgiveness for each other will go a long way.
That's a great attitude to have. You're right. The world really is very small. It sounds like these characteristics that you had about transparency and being open and willing to admit your mistakes and extend that trust and not hold grudges and accept feedback are all really things that help you grow as a leader. And they're also things that, when I think of Franklin Covey, are incredibly valuable traits to building strong and healthy corporate cultures, as well as building strong leaders within those cultures. And I'm curious about how your journey intersected with your work at Franklin Covey. I know you've been there about 23 years. Did you get your first leadership position at Franklin Covey, or did you come there sort of in the middle of your leadership journey? And how did working there kind of help you along and help you grow as a leader?
Yeah, it's not a clean story. I mean, it's not a dirty story. It's not linear per se, right? I started my career working for Vice President George H.W. Bush back in '86 and Senator Quayle. They went on to successfully win the presidency and vice presidency. I chose not to join that campaign in Washington, D.C. I stayed back. I finished my degree at Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. I went to work for the Disney Development Company, which is Walt Disney Company's real estate arm. I spent 4 great years there. I was a bit of an immature jerk, and I was graciously invited to join a different company. That's when the Covey Leadership Center, which then became the Franklin Covey Company, saw something in me that others didn't. And I joined that company, like you mentioned, 23 years ago. I'd always been a leader, meaning I was, student body president in high school, right? And I was the manager at the local restaurant. And I was, a project manager at the Disney company. And I'd always been in leadership positions pretty successfully in your teens and early 20s. Because, when you're 18, people don't require a whole lot of really high level mature skills out of you. But, when you get your corporate job and you're 25, people require a different level of engagement. So the Covey Leadership Center, now the Franklin Covey Company, was instrumental in me understanding what leadership is about, behaving myself into a reputation of being trustworthy, understanding the difference between things that are urgent and things that are important. I love urgency. I love a good fire. And if one doesn't exist, I'll cook one up to make myself look important. I love saving the day. And so the Franklin Covey Company has been invaluable in maturing me into a better leader. I'm always asked, are leaders made or they're born? Well, of course they're made. No one's born a leader. That concept is kind of idiotic to me. I'm a much better leader today than I was yesterday and was last year. And I think there are common principles that govern great leadership. The first, I think, is intent. Is it the right position for you? Because if you're like me, the best salesperson, Carolyn, rarely, if ever, makes the best sales leader. The best salesperson likes to have the spotlight. They want to win the awards. They like the attention. They're very competitive. They like to be recognized. Those are counterintuitive to the best sales leaders. The best sales leaders don't rush in and save the day. They don't have to have all the answers. They realize it isn't about me anymore. It's about other people. And these are lessons that I've learned the hard way through Stephen Covey and through Franklin Covey, that leaders are humble. And their humility comes not from arrogance, but from confidence. Confident people are humble people. And humble people are gracious people. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to always have the spotlight. You don't have to always hog the attention. That they have a genuine desire to see other people to succeed and show patience, confidence, and really a level of abundance where their legacy is now through their people, the results of their teams, not through their own efforts. And if you would have tried to teach me that, Carolyn, 20 years ago, you would have been banging your head up against the wall. I'm a little bit of a late bloomer on that side. And it's really come to me over time that I really realize a leader's job is to lift others And in so many ways, lift their career, lift their confidence, lift their 401ks, lift their college savings accounts. I once had a leader who said to me, Scott, you're never going to be remembered for meeting your second quarter EBITDA or your third quarter cost of goods or your fourth quarter inventory turns. And you got to meet all those things to deserve the job. But what you will be remembered for is the number of people you coached and mentored and grew their skill sets and helped to diminish their fears and built their college savings accounts. That will be your legacy. You have to manage the budget and meet your goal and do your job to deserve the right to stay in the role. But your legacy will be your relationships and the people's careers that you help to blossom. And that was some of the best advice I ever received.
Yeah, it's so true. Getting the results and meeting your goals are kind of table stakes in a lot of ways. Like leaders have to do them, but the challenge is, how do you accomplish that? And there are different ways to do it. And there are some that maintain and build relationships and develop people. And then there are some ways that don't. So it really is important for leaders to be aware of what really makes them into leadership successes. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a balance of both. I've met lots of leaders that are super nice people and they're immensely trustworthy. They give you a kidney and they just don't know how to deliver on the project on time, right? Yeah. Or to deliver the second quarter revenue goal as agreed, as they forecasted. And I've met people who will get results at the expense of culture, of their own character, and neither works. That the biggest leadership success is recognize that it's a balance of courage and consideration. It's a balance of character and competence. You're building trust, you're building character, and you're also building capacity to ensure you deliver results. Because if you don't hit your forecast or your commitments, you don't get invited back. And therefore you don't have the platform, you don't have the office, the moral authority to be able to lift people up in their own careers. I learned that the hard way, as I learned most things, Carolyn.
A lot of us do. So yeah, and it sounds like there's really a lot of things that go into finding that success in leadership. So, and actually that's the second part of the title of your book is leadership success. So then how do you define a leadership success? How do you know when you've achieved that?
Well, I'm not sure you ever do fully, right? I think the first is to manage down your messes because we all have them. So my response to you would be the best way to get to leadership success is through self-awareness, through getting feedback, through minimizing your blind spots. We all have them. And as I opened in the podcast, everybody's got a litany of messes. And we spend too much time trying to cover them up and shy away from them. Just admit your messes. Recognize that on some things, they're not your core talents. It doesn't mean you can neglect them. It doesn't mean you can keep repeating them. But I think the first step to success is just to recognize that you've got a series of messes. And your job is to own up to them and hire people around you that are more competent, better educated, more specifically nuanced in terms of their talent, to shore up your messes. It doesn't mean you can go around and, be a mess. It just means that you're humble enough, confident enough even, to recognize your messes. And then, as Gallup has taught us, really identify your strengths. What are those things that you can be extraordinary at? And it might just be a talent magnet. It might be providing a safe culture where people choose to stay and thrive. You'll know your successes. If you don't know, then ask others about them. But I think leadership is such a journey. It's not for everyone. I write pretty passionately. I have a weekly column in Inc. magazine called From Mess to Success. And the whole series is about, recognizing leadership is not for everyone. I think too often, Carolyn, people become a leader of people because they think it's the next natural step. It's the title, it's the raise, it's the corner office, when it isn't for everyone. And I think the industry of which I've been a part of has done a bit of a disservice, that we've shamed some people. Leadership's for everyone. No, it's not. Sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe you have a leadership role on the Cub Scouts or in your church or mosque or synagogue, but leading people is not everybody's natural calling, and not everybody's great at it, including me. And the real problem, Carolyn, I'll go on a bit more, is when people are lured into a leadership role by their company, they end up realizing too often it's not right for them. And it's a struggle and it's not their natural talent. And what got them success as a star performer isn't even hardly ever what gets them success as a leader. And then they end up kind of flaming out.
Yeah.
And now they're too embarrassed or too mortified or too late to go back to their previous role. So they quit. They move on to a different company. And now the organization has lost their new leadership pipeline and they've lost their star performer. So I would just say to everybody, heed my calling. There is no shame in choosing to say no to the leader of people role. It is not everyone's natural calling. In fact, it's probably 90% of most people's not natural calling. So be very judicious, very deliberate around understanding why you're choosing the leader of people role. Do you know what you're going into? Does your company have support systems and training and an investment in you to ensure that you succeed and you're not faced with so often people are faced with, which is, gosh, this is not fun, because it's often not. Mm-hmm. And that you've got the support system to make sure you learn the skills to become a leadership success. Read my book, The First, because all of my messes can help you avoid some of the messes you're going to face as well.
And that's such an important point about, not everybody should have the goal or is meant to be a leader. I mean, it sounds so horrible. I almost hesitate to say it. I'm so ingrained that that should be everybody's aspiration. But people have such a different collection of talents. And a lot of times career paths at companies, your only incentive to grow is to go into that leadership type of role. And it's really not for everyone. I mean, people excel at being individual contributors all the time. And maybe their leadership is in leaderships of projects or cross-functional teams. Right. There's just so many different talents. And it sounds like your book also has, in addition to stories of your management messes, I believe you've also got some activities or things to help people really reflect and think about the lessons that you've learned and maybe apply them to their own leadership journeys. Is that right?
That is right. I've been in the book business for a long time here at Franklin Covey. I, along with my colleague, Annie Oswald, lead Franklin Covey's thought leadership and book strategy. And I think business books are always too long, like 100 pages too long. Mm-hmm. There's this thing out there in the industry where publishers and editors want 60,000 words. I think most authors have about 30 to 35,000 words in them, which is why most of us, if you're like me, always read the first half of every business book. Mm-hmm. I wrote a shorter book. I wrote a book that's, about 200 pages long. And each chapter is built around one of these 30 challenges. And the first 4 pages are about the story and the learning. And then each chapter ends with, how do you move from mess to success? I have an activity. Usually this is a real specific one. Here's how you can build this challenge from mess to success. And that's what's gotten the best feedback. Like I said, it's 3 weeks running, #1 new release on Amazon. The Denver Post today ranked it their #1 business book. So it's getting some great accolades. And I think it's because it's practical, it's relatable, it's funny, it's blush-worthy in parts, but it's so easy to read, 2.5 hours. You can read a chapter in 10 minutes or less. And at the end of each chapter, like you said, it has these practical, so kind of, now what? And I've got some very practical exercises. Here's a way to move this from mess to success. And I think that was well advised from my editor to not just write a practical book, but to give people some practical next steps so they can actually, that very day, put it into practice.
Definitely need that call to action. No, that makes a lot of sense. Awesome. So what's the best way for people to either get a copy of your book or to learn more about your book or the type of work that you do at Franklin Covey?
Sure. So a couple ways. The book obviously is available everywhere right now for sale. Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, all your local independent retailers. You can't help but find the book. And you also can visit the website for the book. It's managementmess.com. People can follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, everywhere. And then also, I'd encourage you to visit franklincovey.com. It is the company website. As you mentioned earlier, I host a podcast. It's actually a radio program on iHeartRadio called Great Life, Great Career. I also host what is the world's largest leadership newsletter on leadership, where every week I interview a famous thought leader, CEO, best-selling author, and you can subscribe to that for free at Franklin Covey. It's called On Leadership. Sign up your team and be a part of that large community. And unfortunately, I'm not hard to find these days, Carolyn.
Fantastic. And I'll put some links to your social media sites as well as the Franklin Covey sites, your links to buy your book. I'll put those in the show notes so that people have easy access to that as well.
That's gracious of you.
Thank you so much, Scott, for being on the show. I really enjoyed learning about your leadership journey, what you've learned, and how you're now helping other people recognize and move on from their management messes to become leadership successes. As we close out, is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know or anything that they can help or support you with?
I think the one thing that I mentioned, thanks for asking, the biggest leadership lesson I've learned is this notion of slowing down. I mentioned earlier, with people, fast is slow and slow is fast. And in this age of unprecedented speed and choice and opportunity, I remind all the leaders out there listening, slow down with your people, slow down with your family. Your job is a career. Your career is not a life. Put your friends and your family first, and you'll have an amazing legacy.
Great words to live by. Well, thank you so much, Scott, for being on my show today.
My delight.
Thanks for listening to Beyond 6 Seconds. Please help us spread the word about this podcast. Share it with a friend. Give us a shout out on your social media or write a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player. You can find all of our episodes on our website, www.beyond6seconds.com. Until next time.